Hey there, Mr. X. My name is Travis. We spoke earlier on Instagram. I'm 19 years old and currently serving as a member of the U.S. Navy. Air Traffic Control. This story happened to me a while back when I was stationed in Japan. I was always a huge fan of anime and Japanese culture growing up, so going there was like a dream come true for me. The first thing I truly fell in love with there was the mountains. I remember stepping off the plane on Naval Air Base Yokosuka and being captivated by their beauty. Lush green tapestries covered each one of the seemingly endless mountains. I was in the perfect location, not too far from the ocean, and not very far from Tokyo either. I was extremely excited to be there after a lifetime of fantasizing about it. I got my room assignment and moved in with the few belongings I had brought with me. I spent the next 2 weeks going through mandatory culture classes for all newly incoming personnel. Despite my fascination with the country, I still spent pretty much my first month playing video games in my room. Eventually, I did decide to take a trip, planned on hitting a hiking trail up in the mountains. After I had signed out at the admin desk, I took a taxi to Kyoto, where the trail began. I finally got moving around 4:45 p.m. It started out on a large paved road that cut right through a village that was built during the Edo period. Very old. It was fascinating, yet a bit eerie to walk through there in the quiet of the evening. Before long, the trail turned to dirt and led into the forest. The path I took was narrow and tightly packed with trees on either side, creating a mildly claustrophobic corridor. I walked along for hours, transfixed by the plants, insects, and wildlife that were somewhat alien to me. I occasionally came across and chatted with other hikers as we passed by one another. Around 8 p.m., I got to my first rest stop. I took the opportunity to have a seat on the bench and eat a snack. After hanging out there for about 15 minutes, I suddenly began to feel extremely anxious. The hairs stood up on the back of my neck, and my eyes darted around, analyzing my surroundings but seeing nothing out of place. The feeling subsided as I got back on my feet and continued down the trail, but came back about 15 minutes later, this time even more intensely. I tried to ignore it, but something just felt wrong. I didn't notice right away, but the sounds of insects and birds chirping had come to a complete stop. Once I became aware of it, the silence was deafening. The sun was going down and the forest was darkening by the minute. I picked up the pace, wanting to reach the end of the trail before it got too dark. I realized I hadn't had the foresight to bring a flashlight with me in my bag. I tried using the light on my phone, but it was no help. At this point, I was basically power walking down the trail when I heard twigs cracking, probably about 15 to 20 feet behind me and to the left, just inside the thick, bushy lining of the trail. I refused to turn around and pressed on. Inklings of fear and anxiety started to creep up on me when I realized the sounds of twigs and branches began matching my pace. The tension in my mind rose as that went on for about the next 5 minutes, the entirety of which I spent trying not to crap my pants in fear. The idea that something was following me got progressively worse as the forest grew darker. I tried to envision what it might have been. By the sound of it, I first assumed it might have been an animal, but as I listened more closely, I could hear only 2 distinct footfalls, implying it may have been a person walking on 2 feet. As soon as that thought entered my mind, the steps began to speed up at an alarming rate. My heart jumped out of my chest as I broke into a sprint. By this time, the forest was almost completely dark. I was running with my hands outstretched, hoping to avoid colliding with any trees or other hikers on the way, because I could barely see anything. Seconds later, the creaky footsteps transitioned into heavy thuds against the dirt path. I thought to myself, Jesus, it's on the trail with me. My legs burned as I ran. I couldn't stop swearing out loud into the night and praying that I would find the exit to the trail soon. I knew there was no turning back. Behind me, I began to hear breathing, but there was something terrifyingly off about it. All I could hear were deep, rapid exhales. No inhaling breaths at all. Whatever it was constantly spewing air out of its lungs somehow. I started screaming as loud as I could, running at full speed into near complete darkness. Eventually, I took a nosedive and went hurtling into the bush. When the trail unexpectedly veered to the right, I tumbled down a small decline and stopped only once I hit the base of a tree. My arms and legs were covered in small cuts, my nose was trickling blood, and I'd lost my backpack. Worst of all, I could hear the footsteps getting louder and louder as I sat frozen against that tree trunk. I could feel my heart beat in my temples as my eyes shot around, desperately searching the blackness but to no avail. The footsteps came down the path, but continued right past me, fading away until I could barely hear them. I strained my eyes to try to see what it was, but the little moonlight I had was waning, so I saw nothing. I sat there in shock for several minutes before I got up and climbed back onto the trail. I had no choice but to follow in the same direction, hoping to at least make it to the visitor's center, which was about a mile away. Otherwise, I'd be stuck out in the forest all night trying to get all the way back to the entrance. I got my second wind and began to jog down the trail again. As I made headway, the trees began to recede a bit, and I could see the city lights cutting through the dark night. I could even hear the sounds of cars driving in the distance. A measured calm started to come over me. But just as I stopped to catch my breath, I finally saw the thing that had been chasing me. It stood ahead of where I was, just off the trail, towering over the bushes. It was a shadowy black figure, but the moonlight glistened faintly around its silhouette somehow. Its arms and legs were disproportionately, disturbingly long. Its head seemed extremely large for its body, and its torso was wide and stocky. For some reason, I almost threw up when I saw it. An involuntary scream pealed out of my throat, and my hand instinctively slapped over my mouth to stifle it. My knees got weak and I fell to the ground, curling up almost into a fetal position. I was too tired to run. I hate to admit it, but all I could do was lay there, sobbing roughly. I heard its heavy footsteps approach me, stopping just inches away from my face. I kept my eyes closed tightly, refusing to look upon the monstrosity that had been stalking me all night. I heard unnatural-sounding grunts coming from its gigantic head. Its head seemed extremely large for its body, and its torso was wide and stocky. It scraped up dirt from the trail in its hand and sprinkled it over my face, head, and neck. I think it was trying to coax me into looking at it. I didn't. I just stayed on the ground, motionless, until I eventually fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. I woke up early the next morning, my face still pressed against the cold earth, blood-crusted clothing and body aching like crazy. I made my way down the rest of the trail through a haze of grogginess. Luckily, there was a lone employee at the visitor's center who was able to get me to the park infirmary. Needless to say, I haven't been back to that trail, nor have I even gone hiking alone ever since. Thanks for listening, Mr. X. Sincerely, Travis. Greetings, friends. First of all, I'd like to thank Travis for his military service. I have a few things to say about this one. Much like Travis, I always had a fascination with the country and people of Japan growing up. I even learned a great deal of the Japanese language before I enlisted into the military. I studied it for years, actually. I also remember being able to bring everything with me in a couple of duffel bags when I was enlisted. Unlike now, it was basically nothing to just pick up all the stuff that you owned and head to the next station. I used to sell off everything I didn't need before moving to the next brand new location. It was kind of a perfect lifestyle for me. It was the ultimate in minimalist living. So, obviously that part of the story kind of brought me back to the good old days of when I was in. As many of you may know, there have been several stories on this channel that describe situation where there's dead silence where there shouldn't be. Cases where the natural life in an environment falls silent in the presence of something that really sort of doesn't belong there. The funny thing is, the brain sometimes replaces that silence with its own white noise, so sometimes we don't really realize the potential danger lurking in the area that we're in. So about the creature or entity of tonight's story. At first, when I initially read this, I thought it was some kind of ghost, maybe, tormenting those who wander the forests of Kyoto, Japan. I'm sure there are several such stories floating around. No pun intended, of course. So when I did my initial read of the story, trying to decide whether I would be sharing it in the form of a video or not, I thought that what we were all dealing with here was a ghost. But after taking a closer look at the description of the thing, I thought it might have been a shadow person, but there was one detail that didn't quite fit that. The moonlight appeared to reflect off of it. He mentioned there being kind of an outline of moonlight, which kind of suggests that it might have been a solid creature, more along the lines of a cryptid rather than a spiritual, paranormal type of entity. So that, coupled with the fact that it was able to physically impact trees and the ground, seemed to suggest something tangible. So I did a little bit of research on what this cryptid may have been. Being reasonably familiar with the tropes of Japanese folklore, I knew there were many entities known for having disproportionately large heads in particular, but I was a little less sure about the shadow aspect of it. So this research kind of sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. An interesting one, though, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you about it. So I came across a description of a creature known as Almasti or Almas. It's known to have been sighted in various mountainous parts of Asia. There was a drawing made by a Russian geologist who claimed to have spotted one on an expedition back in 1955. The original image was that of a black silhouette, with long arms outstretched and appearing to be lumbering toward the observer. Not the most joy-inducing sight, if I may say so myself. The creature was described as being humanoid and naked, covered in dark hair like that of a bear, also reportedly unable to speak, but could be heard mumbling or bellowing. They also said that it was completely unafraid of humans, but terrified of dogs for some reason. The last feature was perhaps the most striking. The Almasti creatures are said to be able to run very fast, which makes it particularly interesting for this story. I know the Almasti isn't exactly known to inhabit the island of Japan, or islands rather, but that was the very closest thing I could find to what Travis described. The resemblance is actually sort of uncanny. So I based the artwork for this video on the sketch that I saw online from the Russian geologist. I definitely want to avoid showing you the exact drawing that, somebody might have secured the rights to at some point in the past. I don't know, so I just gave you my own interpretation of it. To me, it was definitely a haunting sight. I can't imagine that thing standing over me in the dark of night, sprinkling dirt on my face trying to goad me into looking at it. Like some kind of schoolyard bully or something like that. Really creepy. And I hope you thought so as well. Anyway, thanks for taking a moment of your day, my friend. I hope that life is treating you well. And if it isn't, I hope things look up for you very soon. Find the strength to carry on, and let the warm glow of your light reach as far as it can. Take care, my friends. I'm Mr. X, and may your nights be full of dreams. If you're a ride or die follower, take note. Soon, I'll be giving you a new name of sorts. I plan on making a video that'll explain the various types and levels of dreamers that I've come up with. It should be an interesting time for us all, and I very much look forward to seeing your feedback on it. So, that Almasti-like creature, all hairy and running through the woods at night, I bet you it gets pretty sweaty. Today's code word is sweaty. Work that into a comment in the comment section down below. I'm sure this is going to be a fun one. Thanks again, my friends. Love you guys.